welcome everyone. I am Councillor Hugh Mason, Cabinet Member for Planning Policy and City Development. Please be assured that we have put appropriate cleansing and social distancing measures in place to ensure that this meeting is undertaken in a COVID-secure manner. Limited public seating has been made available, and this has been allocated in such a way that all present are aware of the COVID-secure protocols in place. This meeting is also being webcast to allow the public to attend remotely if they so wish. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in view of the camera used to webcast this meeting. Can I please ask members to remain seated throughout the duration of the meeting and to wear a face covering unless seated. General housekeeping. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and the public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, anyone who is signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. Live web streaming. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed. Everyone speaking will be on camera. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when they have finished. I am told that introductions can be then made around the table, but would you care to introduce yourself?
Thank you, sir. I'm Ian Maguire, the Assistant Director for Planning and Economic Growth.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm James Harris, Senior Local Democracy Officer.
Thank you. We now come to the substance of the meeting. Apologies for absence. Apologies have been received from Councillor Ryan Brandt, who is self-isolating following COVID-19 in the family, and from Councillor Judith Smythe, who is in Staffordshire at the moment. Declarations of interest. I have no interest to declare in this matter. So we come to the main item, in fact the only item on the agenda for this morning, which is proposed changes to the scheme of delegation in respect of Planning Committee. The purpose of the report is to seek approvals to amendments to the scheme of delegation to ensure that Planning Committee time is utilised efficiently as possible to deal with important, strategic or especially contentious applications, and that as quickly as possible. You have the recommendations in front of you, and I would ask Mr. Maguire to introduce the matter.
Certainly, sir. I think you've probably covered the key issue. The scheme of delegation is, of course, the part of the constitutional setup that confirms what must be determined by Planning Committee and what can be determined under delegated authority by officers, which is, of course, the vast majority of cases. Planning Committee time is precious, if you will. It's important that it's focused on the most contentious, significant and important schemes for our communities. Consequently, it's always worthwhile reviewing that to see if we found that balance correctly. Following the most recent review, two areas are felt worthy of alteration, paragraph 53 and 57, and this is to tweak the thresholds for those. Paragraph 53 requires that larger schemes come to the committee. That's currently set at schemes of 6 or more dwellings or 1,000 square metres of non-residential footprint. That's intended to be increased to 10 10 or more dwellings under this recommendation. Paragraph 57 deals with the number of adverse representations that bring a matter to committee. The current system is that a single adverse representation, where they have also made a deputation request, will require a matter to be considered at committee. The recommendation is that is changed to 3 adverse representations, and to remove the requirement to make a deputation request as part of that, so those that do not wish to come into a meeting in person are not disenfranchised by that change. There's also an amendment to paragraph 50, 53, 54 and 57 to make clear the exceptions to those associated with certificates of lawfulness and prior notifications or approvals to deal with those specific types of application, which would align them with the current drafting of paragraph 57 of the Constitution. As I say, the major purpose for this is to find that balance and use committee time in the most efficient way, and obviously so it's down to you whether you feel that has gone far enough or gone too far or tilted the balance one way or the other.
Thank you. We have 2 deputations this morning. The first deputation, I get them in the right order. The first deputation is a request from Councillor Peter Harris. So, Councillor Peter Harris, would you make your deputation, please?
Thank you,
You have
Councillor
6
Mason. I'm going
minutes.
to take your advice and stay seated. I'm going to take your advice and stay seated, so thank you.
Okay.
I don't want to keep standing up, it does the back in. Firstly, I'm going to begin by putting some questions to you as the Cabinet Member to mull over. I think it's important to ask why this wasn't on the order paper last week, because you had a policy meeting last week where this could have been brought forward. Is this a case of policy being rushed through, because this has become very quick from last week to this week? And can you justify a policy switch in such a quick manner? Why hasn't the membership been consulted much thoroughly? I mean, I note that the planning committee members have been discussed and the standing deputies, but I think you would probably agree with me that this is an issue that would affect the wider membership and all 42 members. So I put those questions to you, and I'm pretty sure you will answer them very concisely, as I know that you don't shirk criticism or scrutiny to you, so thank you. But let me move on to the amendment to paragraph 57. I mean, fundamentally, this is about changing the Constitution to ensure that residents would have to call in an application by making adverse representation. In changing this process, I think you have to ask yourself, what right does the Council have to take residents' rights to object away from them? I mean, do we really have the right to do that? Because fundamentally, the planning department isn't up to scratch at the moment and meeting the requirements that the residents feel that they should. I mean, by taking the ability of the residents to object to an application, I think is wrong, and I'm going to give an example for that. If you lived on an end of terraced house and you wanted to build a large extension, and only the residents going to be affected next door would make the complaint and say, I want to call it into committee, are we really going to be doing that and putting neighbour versus neighbour? Because I think that's fundamentally wrong, and I think we shouldn't be happy to make decisions behind closed doors and use the Constitution as a get-out clause, because, I mean, you know as well as I do, Councillor Mason, the Constitution is a body of fundamental principles and ideals which should be upheld and treated respectfully. And I think, noted by yesterday's call-in at the Scrutiny Management Panel, issues with regards to the Constitution should always be held dear, and I think all the membership should be involved in decisions regarding the Constitution. I think that is fundamentally important to ensure that our democracy runs as it should. I mean, we don't want to become a backward borough council, other borough councils up and down the land. I mean, I'm going to use the example of Runnymede, who have made a similar change recently. We're not a backward borough. We are a good unitary council who have quite a diverse membership. And in having a diverse membership, we have a diverse set of residents, and I think we should be ensuring that they are felt completed and whole throughout the process. I'm just going to move on to the report, because that's the democratic deficit side that I think that we should be looking at. 3.3 in the report discusses the backlog. I think we need to have a real open and honest discussion around the backlog, about why it's there. Is it because at one point we simply stopped validating applications? I think that's a big reason behind why we have a backlog. Is it because we lack staffing? Is it that the processes in place are not fit for purpose? Is it an issue that we have with engagement with residents? I think they're all valid questions, and at the moment we're not we're not asking those, we're not answering those questions. I mean, and I remember we brought a motion to Council Mason, and I spoke on it, and I know that you spoke quite eloquently about it as well, about the issues that we have in planning department at the moment, but we have to see that nothing seems to have moved forward from that, despite us spending a vast sum of money on an outside organisation to validate applications. So what I would like to see done on that process is to see, have those funds been spent wisely? You know, I'd like to see a report that is brought back on efficiencies and effectiveness of bringing in an outside organisation and to ensure that we have got value for money from the taxpayer, for the taxpayer, shall I say. Because I think we need to actually sit down and have a grown-up discussion with the Director of Regeneration, the Assistant Director of Planning and Economic Growth, because at the moment, whatever they are doing, it doesn't seem to be working. You know, and I think by bringing this paper today, it's almost like a sledgehammer to crack a nut, effectively. I think that there could have been a much more grown-up and adult discussion beforehand, rather than having to bring it here today and I have to give it a long deputation. You know, because fundamentally that's what's happening. I mean, we go into 4.1 and 4.2 of the report, which makes reference to cost and capacity saving, which I find quite interesting because it talks about there's going to be a cost and a capacity saving, yet the Director of Finance completely refutes that in his comments in the report, which, and I quote, "There is no direct financial implications as a result of approving these recommendations. While this will improve the efficiency of the planning process, no cashable savings are likely to be realised." You know, so it's making a recommendation based on the element of cost saving, but actually, when you look at the bottom line and the man who actually looks after the money, who I think we all respect quite a lot across the council, is saying there's no savings at all. I think that is showing that there's a real, I think, a lack of transparency around this entire report, a real lack of engagement. I don't really want to say it, but I do think there's probably a lack of honesty and a lack of openness. The lack of financial details, I think, to back up the claims that we've seen in the report are ripe for scrutiny, in my opinion. Potentially, you never know, this could get called in on that basis. I think that's something to be mindful of. I think you should really take that into consideration, Councillor Mason. And I also think we shouldn't be taking away the residents' rights to make representation on planning issues. I think we should expect better and we should always strive for better. I think that's an important thing. We shouldn't have a democratic deficit. No decision should be made which stifles democracy and decreases the residents' rights and their opportunity to engage. And, you know, I put it to you now, I think you've got two options. I think you can refuse the report and allow a proper consultation with all 42 members, or I think you could do the sensible thing, and this is what I think would be the sensible thing, is to send it to Governance, Audit and Standards, who are the gatekeepers for the Constitution and policy. I think it's a good place to send it, and allow the matter to be discussed there, and then following a recommendation to the full Council to allow the 42 members to discuss the issue at hand. I think that would be the proper thing to do, to allow proper scrutiny, and to ensure that we are doing the right thing by the residents of the city. Thank you, Councillor Mason.
Thank you very much for a very comprehensive presentation, Councillor Peter Harris. Councillor Norton.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I come before you today to object to the item on the agenda. A bid to move planning decisions behind closed doors, potentially to save cash, and we've heard a little bit about whether that's likely or not, is unsettling for me, especially when public confidence in our planning department's ability to make decisions is so low. Now, the state of planning at PCC is no fault of the taxpayer, and therefore, why should we then penalise them? Fundamentally, I believe that if we can't get our house in order, then that's what we need to look at. We need to look at us getting our house in order and review the processes, not force through changes that make it harder for the public to be heard. Now, my view isn't one of political point scoring. I want to make that point very, very clear. It comes from my experience on the SAP Planning Committee and serving on that committee. A quasi-judicial committee where on a number of occasions I witnessed quotes from cross-party, including Liberal Democrat councillors who are in administration now, such as Councillor Hunt and then Councillor Fuller, who would say that no matter how long it takes, an item, how big or small, must be given due diligence. A view that's normally agreed by most of those members, but somewhat contradicts what we're being asked today, what you're being asked today. Now, I agree that it's important that the Planning Committee are given the opportunity to review the most contentious and the most significant planning decisions. However, this feels like a decision taken due to the backlog, not one in favour of a fair, rounded process. So, my worry is that this, again, not for the first time, challenges the integrity of the committee, and I don't want that to be placed in jeopardy, Chair. On a number of occasions over the last few years, there's been attempts to obtain information on how members are likely to vote, which I think is close to that line of predetermination. My view is that the public have the right to take their applications to committee, to make deputations and have their decisions heard and decided on the day. And the fact that we have an endless backlog of applications is, or that we find it difficult to recruit, is here nor there from a public perspective. So I appreciate that planning committee decisions are more expensive, and on average, compared to delegated decisions by a council officer, I feel that they're actually more decisive and, importantly, and this is what this is all about, more democratic. Now, furthermore, if we have a system where applicants can't get hold of anyone, if they can't find out what the process of their application is, if they're not given an indication of when their decision is likely to be decided, why shouldn't they take it before a committee? They're often left with no other choice, and that's not their fault, that is ours. So, from a member perspective, and in terms of the casework that we receive, which is one of the reasons why I brought this deputation today, we've got residents that claim that they're waiting 880 days to receive a decision. Developers are fleeing Portsmouth because the communication seems to be one-way traffic. There's uncertainty over nitrate credits and whether they've reportedly run out. So action must be taken, and I agree with that. But I don't want us to penalise residents by making them jump through hoops when, we already have what I perceive to be a bit of a broken process. So unfortunately, Chair, this builds into a continuing negative reputation that we have, and when it comes to our planning department, I raised over a year ago now in the motion that Councillor Peter Harris mentioned, and I think I've seen little to no improvement since then. So I ask you, Chair, to reconsider, not to punish the public further, but to make additional efforts to get our, not yours, not the administrators, but our own house in order, so that we can look for potentially better funding. It could be that we invest further in recruitment. It must be that we have greater levels of communication, but it shouldn't be making the public suffer. And for that reason, I ask you to reject the item on the agenda today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Norton. There are one or two matters of fact that I would turn to Mr. Maguire about. The matter has been raised of financial implications. Could you advise us on the apparent discrepancy between the advice given by the Chief Finance Officer and the advice which you have in this paper?
Certainly, so yes, I can confirm there's no discrepancy between the two things. As has already been mentioned, it is indisputable that it is cheaper and faster to do a officer delegated decision than a committee decision. Just common sense, obviously there's less steps and less man hours involved, so that is a difference in cost. As the Director of Finance has quite correctly stated, these are not cashable benefits. We're not proposing that the saving that a substantive change, and this isn't actually a substantive change, it won't make a notable difference. We're talking a couple of score applications every year probably, so it's not the motivation behind this process, but the saving that you would make in moving more decisions from committee to delegated doesn't result in cashable benefits unless you were to lay staff off because you would maintain issues. What we're looking to do is improving efficiency, improving the throughput of the council, and therefore there are no savings associated with the benefits of efficiency that this would create.
Councillor Mason, can I just ask a quick question on that, if I may? Is that okay?
Whilst it is abnormal, yes.
It's just about the what Mr. Maguire has just said. I'll call you Ian actually because we all know your name. Let's flesh it out. I know what you've just said, but obviously I would request
that since this is a public and formal meeting, that you do request Mr Maguire...
Mr Maguire, okay, that is fine, Councillor Mason. I'm happy to do that. I was just trying to be nice. It doesn't happen often. No, I'm just saying that, I see your explanation for that, but it's not here in the report, and that is the problem. There isn't been a level of discussion around that to just, can you see the point I'm making? You've made the point there, but there hasn't been the level of discussion with the membership to realise the rationale behind it, and that is the problem. Would you accept that that's a fair point?
Chairman, if you wish, no, not at all. As the report clearly says, the direct cost is, of course, mostly in officer time, and there is no part of this report that suggests that we will be making cashable or direct savings, and we have worked, obviously, with the Director of Finance and included those comments, so it's quite clear in here that we're not suggesting this is a saving, it is a matter of efficiency, and indeed, as Councillor Mason quoted at the beginning of the report, that is what we clearly say is the purpose of this report, is to utilise efficiently the time of the Planning Committee. So,
okay, that's fair enough. Okay, in your world, Mr Maguire, time is money means nothing.
I would then wish to clarify the process which we would go through for objections. Am I right in the following? That instructions would be provided on the website for people making objections that, 1, if there are no more than 2 objections, the matter may be dealt with under delegated powers and not brought before the committee at a public meeting unless, 2, a relevant ward councillor requests that the matter be brought before the committee. 3, that all applications where there are 3 or more objections will be considered by the committee at a public meeting. And 4, there will be no longer a requirement, there is no requirement that objections should be supplemented by oral or written deputations if the matter is to be considered by the committee in public session. Would that be correct?
all but one point, there's no requirement that it's a ward councillor, any member, whether they are the ward councillor or not, is able to make a request to bring things to committee.
So any councillor, right. Now, a number of other matters have been raised, and clearly in the deputations, which we've heard this morning, the matter of residents' rights have been raised as a matter of concern. I think we need to get some idea of the scale with which we are dealing. How common is it that a matter is brought to the committee at the request of only one objector?
So unfortunately, I don't have a full breakdown of every number, but there is very rarely a committee where we don't see that circumstance. There will be committees where that's not the case because it's one of the 7 ways things can come to committee. So it'll vary enormously. One key point I would make, of course, is one of the key matters that the Planning Committee always has to bear in mind is it is not the number of objections that is the pertinent matter, it's the quality of those objections, i.e. the point they're making. If 100 people make a point that is not lawfully a material consideration, then that is obviously not something that the Council can take into account, but if one person makes a material point, then the Council should be giving significant weight to it. So that always plays into those matters, and the other categories of exceptions to get things to committee, the scale of development, the ability for both members and officers to bring things that are of significant local concern, obviously help capture those other matters as well, even if there are potentially smaller or no objections to a scheme.
Right. I have, since we've kind of run this more or less as a committee rather than as the decision making, I'd ask the 2 members who are here, were I to accede to the recommendations which are here and agree to paragraph 2 on delegation, would it be your intention to call it in?
I'm happy to hold some people's feet to the fire, Councillor Mason. I think that scrutiny is the best way, and I think you have other options on the table, and I think you know as well as I do that the membership here expects a lot, and we are an engaged membership, and I hope you take that into consideration when you make your decision, because I have a lot of respect for you as a member, and I wouldn't want to do that, but let's just say I'm considering it.
Thank you for your consideration.
Councillor Mason, if I may, so for me, immediacy is key for me, and I think that we've kicked the can down the road a little bit with planning, really. It was over a year ago that we took that motion to council, so I think I would probably shadow Councillor Pater Harris's view on this one.
Can I just add, Councillor Mason, as well? I mean, this is not, obviously, we don't want to give you a hard time, because we understand that this is about every single member and every single person in the city. This is not about Liberal, Democrats, Conservatives. It's not about that at all. But as I said, I think you've got some options. I think you have. I think governance and audit and standards would be a sensible place to start, because they are the custodians of the Constitution. And I know from sitting on it with yourself that we take those matters very seriously over the years. And I think that would be the best place to start. And I'm sure Councillor Madden will look forward to it.
I have spoken to Councillor Madden on the matter, and so... let's see if we have any other. I think we have here then a matter of principle on the second recommendation. The third recommendation will follow on from the second recommendation. It is a matter of principle, and I think it is very clear that this would be called in for further consideration. This would take time. I am therefore minded to approve the first paragraph, which is the threshold for applications to be moved from 6 to 10, since we have experience of running at 10, and that seems to have worked well. On the second matter, since it is been raised as a matter of the standards which are set by this authority, I consider that the Governance Audit and Standards Committee will have a view on this one way or the other, whether we like it or not, whatever decision I make today or not. I would therefore think that this matter should then be considered by the Governance Audits and Standards Committee on my recommendation, rather than having to be called in and going through a long process before it reaches Governance Audits and Standards. I think it's in the interest of efficiency, therefore, what I intend to do is to approve item 1 and item 2 and item 3 so far as item 2 to pass to the Governance Audit and Standards Committee on a matter of the residents' rights and the democratic objections which have been made, and on item 3 to make any amendments to paragraph 53 of the scheme of delegation which related to paragraph 1 of the matter before us. So it is a split decision on my part. It is a decision that part 1 and those things which stem from part 1 should be approved, that part 2 should be forwarded to the Governance, Audits and Standards Committee with my recommendation that they should consider this matter favourably, but that they should nonetheless consider it in the light of the objections which have been made in the deputations this morning. Does that give sufficient clarity? Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for your courtesy to the chair. That, so far as I see, concludes the entertainment for this morning. Thank you very much for your attendance.